over the years to talk Minnesota Vikings football. Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus. What is up, Sam?
Doing good. How about you?
Oh man, I am. I figured out which meme I am today. The SpongeBob
Oh, yeah?
one where he's sort of leaning on something and he's just going like, he sort of looks exhausted and that's me. I mean, Friday before a playoff game, and then we get a vote of confidence from ownership today on Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, which means nothing, but it's interesting that they put it out there. And then we have two cornerbacks injured that we didn't expect, Sam. Everything is happening.
Yeah, and the latter one in particular looks like it could be a real problem heading into the weekend against the Saints.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking about earlier in the week when I saw Alexander wasn't practicing, like, okay, that could be a problem. He's actually turned out to be a pretty decent player as a slot corner. But the Hughes thing came out of nowhere today, and they put him on injured reserve, so he can't come back at any point in the playoffs. And not having those two guys, now you can't rotate the cornerbacks. And guess who it comes down to? Xavier Rhodes and Michael Thomas. What way would you describe the mismatch at the point that those two guys are in their careers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge mismatch. But the other thing is that the Saints like to put Michael Thomas in the slot a ton. He actually leads the NFL in yards per route run from the slot. And now the Vikings don't really have any slot corners. So it was already a pretty significant mismatch when you look at it in terms of how they're going to cover this guy. And it's even bigger if they use him in the slot as much as they like to typically. The Vikings just really don't have anyone that can match up with him. It's pretty concerning on paper.
Well, and not only that, but the key on defense to even being respectable this year has been that you have Danielle Hunter getting a ton of pressure. And until recently, toward the end of the season, Everson Griffin doing the same thing. But this is a quarterback in Drew Brees who, according to your stats, PFF, gets rid of the ball quicker than anyone else in the NFL and has only been sacked 12 times in 11 games this entire year. I mean, this is looking like, Sam, if they don't have the A plus version of Kirk Cousins, that they don't have much of a shot in this game because no matter what they scheme up, it's really hard to see them just shutting down Drew Brees in that offense in that building.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's like a double whammy with the Saints offense because that offensive line is really good in terms of pass protection. Plus, Drew Brees gets rid of the ball faster than almost anybody. Has a really low average depth of target. Just likes to carve up zone defenses. So yeah, I don't really see how they slow that down consistently, particularly with the guys they got missing now in the secondary. They're going to need turnovers, I think. And then, yeah, I'm with you. I think that basically puts the pressure firmly on the shoulders of Kirk Cousins and means that they're going to need to keep pace with Drew Brees and this New Orleans offense in the dome. And, he's going to need to hit all of those deep shots that do open up. You can't be off anytime you see a Thielen or a Stephon Diggs running behind the defense. You need to make that connection because you're going to be chasing points and chasing possessions.
Is there anything that you make, Sam, of how a team or an offense or a defense has been playing in the second half of the year, in the final 4 weeks of the year, or whatever, that would be predictive of how they might play in the playoffs? Because Kirk Cousins is coming off just about as bad of a game as you could play against the Green Bay Packers 2 weeks ago on Monday Night Football. And even his performances otherwise have not been in the special ballpark that they were in October. The second half of the season has been pretty pedestrian for him. Do the numbers point to that you can find that at any time that it exists, or does it say, look, if you're playing this way, then you might struggle when you get to the postseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's just small sample sizes, and there's a lot of noise with that. I mean, even if you look at his season, it's really a spectacular sort of 4 or 5 game stretch, and then good to average the rest of the time outside of the one horrendous game right at the start of the year, which got everybody kind of talking about Stephon Diggs trade rumors and all that kind of crazy stuff. So I think Kirk Cousins hasn't been as good down the stretch as he was during that crazy 5 game stretch, but that's because that stretch was the outlier, not necessarily his play down the back end of the season. I think ultimately Cousins has been playing well this season. He's been playing above his typical baseline of what you expect from him, but they do need him to have one of his better games because the offense is going to have to score a lot of points going up against a Saints team that's almost certainly going to do likewise.
So I've come to believe after covering 2 full seasons of Kirk Cousins in the good Kirk, bad Kirk, and I think I can spot it after 2 series and sometimes 1 series. Do you buy into this being a thing? Because I don't believe in the national TV thing, because I've been in the building where he's played just fine in national TV. But when I was in Kansas City and his first throw to Adam Thielen hit Thielen in the shoes when he was wide open, like, it's one of those games. And it was. And the same thing for Monday night, overthrows CJ Ham in the red zone. Like, this is not going to be good for Cousins. I don't know if you felt the same way about him, but when the good version shows up, he leads a team right down the field to start a game and looks like he's right in rhythm and has confidence. And if there's a such thing in this world as momentum, he's got it sometimes. And I just don't know how to figure out when we're going to see it and when we're not.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's definitely a quarterback that needs confidence more than some of these other guys. I don't think he reacts particularly well to adversity. And if you do get Kirk Cousins in rhythm early in the game, I think you have a much better chance than if you don't. You know, the last Green Bay game, I find it a little bit difficult to put too much blame on Kirk Cousins. He definitely didn't play well, but the offensive line got absolutely wrecked in that game. And ultimately, if your offensive line gets beaten that badly in a game, the quarterback needs to play absolutely out of his mind to be able to overcome that kind of performance. And, you know, with the best will in the world, Kirk Cousins just doesn't have that in him very often. And not many quarterbacks do, to be fair. So, you know, I think it's definitely true that they could use Kirk Cousins getting off to a hot start. But maybe the bigger thing is they could also use that offensive line holding up its end of the bargain against a pretty stout New Orleans defensive front.
Now, what do you think, Sam, of just one game carrying a lot of weight with an ownership? Because I think this one does. And as an analytics fan, I look at one game and say, well, anything can happen. That doesn't really seem like a great model for doing it, but this is also the NFL. And you're also looking at a team that could go 2 years after signing Kirk Cousins with 0 playoff wins. And that is not what the ownership paid for. Do you think that it would make sense if they came up well short in New Orleans for the Vikings to make major changes, to make a coaching change, to draft a quarterback in the first round, trade up, do something like what Kansas City did with Patrick Mahomes? I mean, does all of that make sense? Or would you say, like, look, if you're in this good of a position as a franchise to be in it all the time under Mike Zimmer, you should want to be there?
I mean, I don't think one game should be making those decisions, whatever happens. I think that doesn't mean you don't need to make those decisions, but you need to weigh it on the balance of what's actually happening. So, you know, the quarterback spot in particular, I think you can definitely make an argument that you draft the quarterback in the first round, that you make significant moves to change what's happening at that position because, you know, Kirk Cousins. This is the ceiling of Kirk Cousins this season, and it still probably isn't going to be enough to overcome what's around him if they don't play out of their minds. And you know, it's only going to cost more to get the guy even again once his contract is up. So I think you can definitely make the argument that you need to make those kind of moves. The changing coaching I find a much tougher sell because they are competitive every single year. They have done a lot of good things. And you know, I don't think one game should be making that decision for you. Ultimately, you look at what the guy's done, you look at where this team is headed, and you decide if he's the guy for the future. But you know, New Orleans were fighting for the number one seed in week 17. This is one of the best teams in the NFL, certainly in the NFC. I don't expect the Vikings to win, and honestly, I think it could be the biggest sort of points, the biggest score differential of the weekend. So, you know, if you look at that and you say, well, they came up short in the playoffs once again, sure, but they're also facing what could be the best team in the NFL. And on the road, you know, it was a tough spot for them to go in and expect anything from.
Yeah, I wonder about, where can you go from here, which is the question that they'll be asking. I mean, yeah, you don't have as strong of a team as New Orleans, but the point was when you signed Kirk Cousins and paid everybody else, and some moves were erroneous, probably, certain contracts that were signed, but you pay everybody else. If you're in ownership, you asked for playoff wins. You asked to be relevant at the end, and not the team that we're going into and saying, yeah, they'll probably get beat by the most of anybody else this weekend. I mean, that's just not what the expectation where the bar was set. Now, I might say the moment you signed Kirk Cousins, you signed up for 10-6, and that's kind of where you were going to be. But they're in a really tough position to say, how do you get from 10-6 back to 13-3 or deep into the playoffs to beat teams with better quarterbacks than you?
Yeah, and ultimately a lot of that rests on, hitting on a couple of drafts. I mean, you look at basically if you're going to have Kirk Cousins as your quarterback, you're going to need a top 5 roster in the NFL to be one of those dominant teams. And right now they're not. They had a fantastic defense in 2017. It's taken steps backwards. Even now there are guys having career years, but there are too many holes. Right now there's no viable number one cornerback on this team, and cornerbacks have never been more important. So you can't expect to have a top quality defense if you don't have the number one corner capable of shutting down the best receivers in the NFL every single week. Up front, they've got great production out of Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin, but the interior isn't the force it once was. So, there's a lot of things you can improve on this team, even if you don't touch the quarterback or the coach. I think ultimately they need to focus on what gives them the best chance of creating this top 5 roster. And maybe that does involve some changes in the organizational structure. But ultimately, they're not a million miles away from that right now. They just need to do a little bit better across the board and identify some of these problems and fix them.
Sam, I've had this as a close game in my mind all week. That kind of changed a little bit today, but I'm just going to roll with it. I mean, the two corners being out, yikes. But I'm just going to stick with it that I think it ends up being an offensive shootout that Drew Brees comes out on top at the end. How are you seeing this one?
Yeah, well, even before the cornerbacks were down, I thought this was going to be tough sledding for the Vikings, and even more so now. I honestly think the Saints are arguably the best team in the NFL, and the Vikings aren't. So they're going to struggle, I think, to deal with a team of that quality on the road.
But other than that, though, everything is fine. And let me just ask you,
Yeah.
what's this is all good. Let me just ask you though, what's the most interesting other game, aside from Vikings and Saints?
Honestly, I think all 4 games this weekend are interesting. I could definitely see. I mean, Philadelphia winning at home would be an upset, and I think that's definitely on the cards. The Titans winning on the road in New England would be an upset, and I think that's on the cards as well. And then Buffalo against Houston is just a sort of fascinating matchup, whether it's quarterback against quarterback, whether it's Davius White against Nuke Hopkins. I think there should be 4 good games.
I think Ryan Tannehill's probably the best quarterback ever. So that's the one I'm most interested in, is seeing the greatest quarterback of all time and then Tom Brady. See what I did there?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean the other
It's
the other thing is
crazy that
whether
he led the
Tannehill
league
can
in
kind of keep
quarterback
this
rating.
thing going.
Yeah, I mean
It's
it's
crazy. Ryan Tannehill has been playing at this level, and we've expected the wheels to fall off, and they haven't yet. But he's going to go up against an all-time game planning, defensive-minded coach. So he's going to face challenges that he hasn't so far this season. But yeah, like on paper, heading into this game, he has been dramatically the better quarterback.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm most interested in, because we'll see if their headsets go out or whatever else, crazy things tend to happen in New England. And then if Tannehill can keep it up, and Vrabel beating Belichick would be really something. So, Sam, it's been great to have you on all year. We will see if this sort of continues. I mean, obviously, we'll continue to have you on, but whether our season includes previewing more games, so we'll know that soon. But I appreciate all the times you've come on, all the fun we've had this year. So thanks for coming on again, man.